Welcome into the Stack Shack Sports Show. Schedule release came out tonight. We're getting out a video right now. Rapid fire, going through every single schedule. I'm just going to give you my biggest kind of takeaway. We will be doing deep dives and team predictions, all of that kind of stuff coming up in the next couple of months. You will get a prediction video, a deep dive video from every single team. I'll give you what to bet on, over, under points totals, everything. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens here. So let's just get straight into it. We've got a couple of preseason games. Won't be talking about those. Regular season, Ravens Chiefs. What an absolute banger to start the year off on Thursday Night Football. Gonna be fantastic. Then they come out to Las Vegas, get them at home. Having to go to Kansas City, though, is tricky. It's tricky. Cowboys, Bills, that wraps up their first few games. And then they get into a divisional game at Bengals. Historically, getting the Bengals early in the season seems to have been better the last few years. So good for them to have to go on the road earlier in the season. But we'll see. Maybe the Bengals will be cooking a little bit more this year. Then Commanders, Bucks. Week 10, another divisional round. Obviously, the divisional round at Browns. Kind of interesting that they're getting a lot of these divisional games away at the beginning. So their away games coming at the beginning, I think that's a benefit. Look at this. Then the Steelers away. And then they get Steelers and Browns at home. Big, big benefit, I think, for the Ravens to be able to get a bunch of their away divisional round games out early in the season. Allow them later in the season, when it's crunch time, when you really got to win some games to get into the playoffs, you get those games at home. I think that's key. Could maybe give them a few extra wins. We're going really fast here. I'm talking a million miles a second. We're moving to the Bengals. So Bengals get the Patriots week 1. Pretty easy if you're the Bengals. Then week 2, they get Kansas City. When we get to Kansas City, holy smokes, are they kind of in a bit of a rough start here. Commanders, Carolina, real nice to have probably 2 wins right before they get Baltimore at home. Not too bad. Carolina's also not super far away, so you feel pretty good about that. Again, divisional rounds being the most important, especially in the AFC North where things are super tight. I mean, all 4 teams are fantastic. Another key game I would be looking at is this Los Angeles game, especially when it's coming in between 2 divisional games. So they're in Baltimore, got to go all the way out to Los Angeles, and then I got to come back home for Pittsburgh. Very good benefit that this game is at home. If this was reversed and they played Pittsburgh at home, left to the Chargers, and then had to come back to Baltimore, I think that would be working out a little bit worse for them. And we'll see how that works. They end with the Steelers at Pittsburgh. Tough, but they do get the Browns at home down the stretch, which is nice as well. Looking at the Browns' schedule, their week 1 matchup, they get the Dallas Cowboys. All right, that's a fun game. Then Jacksonville, at Jacksonville, New York, Las Vegas. Honestly, look at this beginning of this season. I could see the Browns going on a bit of a tear. I mean, I'm not high on Dallas. I think they've lost a lot of weapons, so pretty good start for the Browns. I mean, 5-0, is that possible? Very, very doable, I think. Very doable. Then they got to go at Philadelphia. They get the Bengals at home, Ravens, Chargers. Kind of a tough stretch right there. Tough stretch right there of tough opponents. Then they got to play Kansas City, Cincinnati, Miami, and Baltimore to end the season. So an early beginning of the season like that. Now, they do get Miami at home. That's helpful, especially later in the year. You know, it's getting a little colder. And so you might have an advantage over Tua. But they have an early advantage in the first 5 games, I think, being pretty weak. Last 4 games, pretty rough. Pretty rough. And man, look at the Kansas City Chiefs. It's like, are they an AFC North team? They're playing every AFC North team. This is crazy. So Steelers, they go Falcons, Broncos, Chargers, Colts. This is kind of a lot of traveling around, right? You know, they're at Atlanta, then they're at Denver, then they're at home for the Chargers. Look to maybe struggle a little bit. We'll see. You know, we got some rookie quarterbacks and new quarterback faces up here in weeks 1 and 2. New coach in week 3. Can Tomlin maybe just kind of be extra prepared at an advantage, but they're breaking in a new quarterback. So we'll have to see how that works out. A week 9 bye leading into Washington after New York. Not the greatest bye position ever. That's a tough stretch right there. Look at those 4 divisional games in a row. That's going to be rough. I'm going to be honest. And then you got to finish Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati. I told you, Kansas City is just an AFC North team. I think they just are stuck in this year. That last 4 weeks, whoo, that is rough. Do not think the schedule lined up very well. I mean, really, it's the week 12 on. Oh, gosh, if you're Pittsburgh, that is just brutal. Week 11 on. I mean, week 11 on. This is just brutal. Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, Bengals. Oh, gosh. I mean, this is... You better get some wins early because week 11 on, brutal. Brutal. We'll look at this team a little more in depth later, and I'll give you my over-under predictions. On to the Miami Dolphins. They get Buffalo at home early. Would like, if you're Miami, to that be the away game, because you'd like to get that early. But you look later, week 9, November, I think that's still probably okay, but it could be cold in Buffalo. That could be tough. Obviously, divisional games. How does the season end, though? 1 win, but a couple of other really tough matchups. At Cleveland, at Houston. Now, San Francisco, they get at home. Could be a little tough for San Francisco, traveling all the way out. That's a long flight, so that could be a benefit I could see for the Dolphins. Nothing else really jumping out at me there. Buffalo, week 1 of the regular season, they get Arizona. Then they go at Miami, Jacksonville, Baltimore. At Baltimore, should be a fun game there as we continued going down. This is a good bye position, I think. I mean, a big showdown, but they get the Colts the week before, so you feel like, yeah, they're probably going to win that one. Then they go play Kansas City. Then they get a bye before they have to play the Niners. Also, notice, Kansas City and San Francisco at home. Big benefits for Buffalo. Big benefits for Buffalo. And end of the season. That's a beautiful ending of the season if you're Buffalo. I mean, is Aaron going to be healthy the whole season in New York? I don't know. Can they fix the offensive line? We'll have to see. I don't think the Patriots are going to be that good. So look for Buffalo to maybe make a late push. If they're close to the playoffs or out of the playoffs, they still have a shot because they're playing a pretty easy schedule towards the end of the year. New England, we already saw them playing Cincinnati at the beginning of the year. Then they get Seattle at home. Got to go at Jets, at Niners. This is a kind of a rough at the Jets. Then they got to go all the way out to California. And then they get Miami at home. Thankfully, they get Miami at home. That will be helpful. If we look towards the end of their week, a week 14 bye, don't think that's particularly incredible. It's not going to give them any extra time, really, to prepare for a big Buffalo matchup. They do, again, play Buffalo twice towards the end of the year. So look for New England to maybe have an opportunity to look okay at the beginning of the season. New York, I don't know how good they're going to be, but there's not a lot of big W's. Again, I'm not high on New England. New York, gotta start the year off in San Francisco. Now, Aaron from Northern California, so kind of a home game for him, went to Cal, so I think he'll be okay in that game. Some time to prepare, but man, Shanahan's tough week 1. Woo! You don't know what you're getting. He's going to have so many new plays that nobody's ever seen before. So that's kind of a tough draw, but they get at Tennessee, that's okay. Then they get New England, Denver at home. So not the worst start to the season. I see some W's there, which is kind of nice. If we look towards the end, again, I kind of like to look at the beginning and the end, let the middle play itself out. If you look how the end goes, not an easy schedule. Not an easy schedule coming down the stretch. I mean, Miami, Jacksonville, Rams, Buffalo, Miami again. Now, double Miami, end of the year, that could be helpful, especially the Week 18 matchup could be a very advantageous situation for the Jets. Texans, preseason games, we'll skip those. Regular season, they start at Colts, then Chicago, Minnesota, Jacksonville. Honestly, I feel like there's a lot of W's there for Houston. Could really get them rolling. They got to play Buffalo, but they play Buffalo at home. Big benefit. We already looked at Buffalo, saw that as a tough matchup for Buffalo. Then they go at New England. Again, don't think they're that scary. At Green Bay is a tough game. Keep going through. They get a bye before playing Miami, and they get Miami at home. Now, they do have to travel to Kansas City right after that. That could be a little bit difficult. And then Baltimore. That week 15, 16, 17, that's going to be a tough stretch, but should be able to close out a win at the end of the year against Tennessee, I would imagine. Moving on to the Colts. Again, we just saw they're playing the Texans week 1. Then the Colts go at the Packers, Bears, Steelers. Now, they get Bears and Steelers at home. Could be a benefit. The big thing for the Colts is Anthony Richardson healthy. That's the big question. That's what we're going to be thinking about. We look down at the end of the season. There's some wins here. There's some wins potentially. How will Denver be doing? I don't know. Got a new quarterback, so we'll have to see. Then Tennessee, they get at home at the Giants, Jacksonville. There's some opportunities here. A New England game before a bye. Don't love this bye position. I'd like it to be in a better spot before a bigger marquee game, but whatever. As far as Jacksonville goes, they start at Miami. That should be fine. They're both in Florida. All good. And then get Cleveland at home, which is nice. At Buffalo, tough game, tough place to play, but you play in them earlier in the year, so the weather's not going to be as big a factor. We look at the end. I like Jacksonville's end. I do. They get Tennessee twice. They get the Raiders, they get the Jets, and the Colts. Again, you're going to have to beat some decent teams to make the playoffs, but that feels like a possible run there at the end of the year, which is kind of exciting. Tennessee, again, we've already seen some of their matchups. At Chicago to start the year. New York, Green Bay, Miami. If we look towards the end, though, Tennessee, it depends on if they feel better than Jacksonville. I would have Jacksonville better on paper, so that's tough. Bengals probably better on paper as well. Colts, is Anthony Richardson helpful? Tennessee could be in a rough stretch there towards the end of the year, but there's plenty of wins kind of sprinkled out here that I don't see any huge issues there. Not a lot to talk about, I don't think, with Tennessee's schedule. As far as the Broncos' schedule, the beginning of the season, nothing super elaborate that I'm noticing. Not too worried. Baltimore, Kansas City, back-to-back games, week 9 and 10. That can be difficult. That can absolutely be difficult. Now, they get Cleveland, but then a bye before Indianapolis. I don't know. But then Chargers, Bengals, Chiefs. Honestly, a pretty rough schedule if you're a Broncos fan. I would have liked to have some of these games a little more spread out. There's definitely some W's spread out here. Especially towards the beginning and kind of in the middle. You'll have a game, Saints and Panthers. That feels like a very possible double win. But then you got to play the Ravens and the Chiefs back to back. Would have loved to have maybe the Falcons in between or some other matchup. Now, Falcon, divisional game, it's tough. Again, Kansas City after going at Baltimore. That's just two tough back-to-back games. And then to the end of the season, you got to go at Cincinnati and then play Kansas City to end the year. Woo! That is a rough set of games. Now, Super Bowl champions, especially I would add, Broncos, they weren't very good last year. You expect Super Bowl champions, they get the hardest schedule, right? Back-to-back, can the Chiefs make another run? Week 1 of preseason looks good, but regular season, you're starting off with 2 tough games. Again, like I said, I feel like Kansas City just ended up in the AFC North. Because the AFC North is so good. And again, Super Bowl champion typically gets the worst schedule as far as difficulty year to year, right? So Baltimore, Cincinnati to start. Then you get the Falcons, Chargers, Saints. Kansas City should be able to maybe regain a little bit there. At San Francisco is going to be a big game, potential Super Bowl, preview. It's a rematch, right? But then Vegas, Tampa Bay, feeling pretty good. Denver, Buffalo, but they get Carolina. I'm going to be honest. If you look at this schedule, Kansas City may be basically playing in the AFC North with the fact that they're playing all of the teams there. But look at how nicely they're kind of interspersed here, right? You got the Bills, but then you get to play the Panthers and the Raiders, and then the Chargers and the Browns and the Texans. That's a tough stretch. But then you're going to feel okay against Pittsburgh, probably. you're going to have some back-to-back tough games, but even early in the season, you play the Niners, but the week before is a bye. Andy Reid coming off a bye, huge advantage. And then the week after is the Raiders, who you feel confident in beating. So, honestly, for having the quote-unquote most difficult schedule of the year, I kind of would rather have Kansas City's schedule than Denver's. That's a brutal three-stretch game. We got a brutal double back-to-back here. The Chiefs feel like they have a little bit of a respite kind of in between some of these marquee games. Moving on to the Raiders. Week 1, Raiders-Chargers. 2 new head coaches in their first years with these new teams. Pretty exciting. That should be a really fun game. I'm really excited to see how that works out. Then you got to go at Baltimore. At Chargers, at Baltimore. Kind of tough. Los Angeles Chargers don't have the best home field advantage, but kind of difficult. Get the Panthers afterwards. Browns, Bengals, Chiefs. That's tough. I'm going to be honest. That's tough. Chiefs, Bengals. Then you get a bye. You do get a bye before you got to go to travel to Miami, which is nice as far as, one of the longer travel games that the Raiders are going to have to go on. And, you look at the rest of the schedule, I'm going to be honest, it's not too bad. There's some wins here in the middle, potentially. Should be a good year out there for the first-year head coach. Moving on to the regular season for the Chargers. Obviously, we just saw playing the Raiders to start the year. You look at this schedule, Chiefs, then you get a bye. Early bye can be tough. A lot of times you want your bye to be a little later, when some injuries maybe have piled up, allow people to get healthy. A week 5 bye can be a bit difficult, but as far as back-to-backs, that's a tough back-to-back, but then you'll get Atlanta before you got to play Kansas City. It's not too bad. Not too bad of a schedule there for the Chargers. Bears. Tennessee Titans to start the year. Already obviously saw that. New quarterback, obviously, the number 1 pick. Giving him Tennessee Titans at home, I'm going to be honest, feels like a really solid, ease you into kind of game. Like, that's about as good as you can probably hope for the Bears. So, that's nice. Then we'll go the duel with CJ Stroud. Should be fun in week 2. Moving on, again, they were one of the worst teams last season, so they're going to have a little bit of an easier schedule. Looks like there's some potential for, some success for Caleb Williams. There's some W's in here. There's absolutely some W's. Avoid some of the tougher matchups that we've seen from other teams. And first year in the league, I feel like that's pretty reasonable. Moving on to Detroit, should be a fantastic first game of the year. Man, going to be a lot of fun. If you move on, they're going to have really a decent spread of teams, I would say. No really, really rough back-to-backs. I project, Jared Goff just got a big contract. Penei Sewell got signed. Amon-Ra St. Brown got signed. They're spending money left and right. But if you look at this, I'm not seeing any super scary back-to-backs. Green Bay, Houston could be tough, with Jacksonville as the third game. But it's not Chiefs, Ravens. It's not Bengals, Ravens, Browns. I'm going to be honest. Looks like a lot of W's. Obviously, the NFC, I think, is a little bit easier. But yeah, Detroit, I'm liking this schedule a lot. Not a lot of really rough back-to-backs. And they get Buffalo at home, so they don't have to go play in terrible weather. Chicago, they got to go play, but I don't know. I think Detroit can handle Chicago. It's a first-year quarterback. Moving on to the Packers, another potential Super Bowl bubble team that a lot of people are talking about. You got to play at Philly. I mean, we already saw that. That's a tough matchup to start the week off and the season. They get a bye after Detroit, before Chicago. Not the greatest. Would have loved this to be 1 week later so they could play Chicago and then get the bye before they got to play San Francisco. So that's significant. But Packers feel pretty good. I feel pretty good if I'm a Packers fan, I think. Vikings at New York. Good first game. Then they get San Francisco at home. Benefit. You got to play at Green Bay, but they play them early. Again, whenever you're looking at these dome teams moving to cold weather teams, you like to have the away game be earlier in the year. September should still be beautiful weather out there in Green Bay. Moving towards the end of the season, There's some options here. There's some options here if the Vikings are going to make a run. Moving on to Washington. Regular season starts. Man, Washington also drew the AFC North. I just think that's tough when that happens. They'll get a bye in week 14 before the Saints. Again, probably wish that would be one more away. But this is an away game, so it is nice to have the bye before an away game as far as travel is concerned. Philadelphia start again with Green Bay. We've seen that. Very exciting for that game. You move along here. Philadelphia, I think, should be fine. As long as the coaching collapse that happened at the end of last season doesn't happen again, I think they're definitely the shoe-in for winning that division. New York, Minnesota, Washington to start. Not too bad. Not too terrible. This is a tough kind of 3-game stretch. They get Cincinnati at home. They get Philadelphia at home. So those two benefit them in that there is a bit of a tough stretch, but they get 2 of those games at home. They got to go at Pittsburgh, but then they get Washington at home, at Carolina. Then a bye. Definitely going to be feeling that bye after this kind of stretch of games. Not the best positioning for the bye, not a huge benefit. Again, Chiefs probably had the best bye in the fact that when they have to go play San Francisco, they get a bye the week before. That's a huge benefit for the Chiefs. Again, like I said, Chiefs are supposed to have the hardest schedule. I felt like it was actually pretty easy. You know, it worked out pretty well for them. Dallas at Cleveland to start the year. Ooh, Dak Prescott. It's going to be a bit rough this season. Now, nice that they get a bye before they have to go to San Francisco for that big game. Also, it's right after the Detroit game. So, I like the bye placement for Dallas. It's very nice. And at the end of the season, there's some wins here potentially. So, not too bad. Not too bad if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan. Moving on to the Bucks. Regular season, Washington to start the season. Saw that already. Then at Detroit. Ooh. That's a tough game. That's a tough game. It is. If we move down, Kansas City, San Francisco, back-to-back. Pretty rough. Pretty rough. They do get a bye right after that, so that'll be a nice respite. And then there's some W's here. I mean, there's some W's there. I absolutely believe there's some W's. So not a terrible bye placement to then be able to run towards the end of the season and feel probably pretty good about your season. As far as the Saints are concerned, win at the beginning. They got to go at Dallas. Might be an angry Dallas team coming off of a loss. We'll have to see. They got to play Dallas and Philadelphia back-to-back weeks. Get potentially a little break with the Falcons, then at Kansas City. They get the bye right before the Rams and right after the Cleveland Browns. Honestly, not a bad bye placement. And, you know, some potential wins towards the end of the season as well. Carolina. The worst team last season, so hopefully have the easiest schedule. At New Orleans, they get the Chargers at home early, and they get a bye right before Kansas City. That's a benefit. Again, I think Kansas City is significantly better than the Panthers, but you get a bye to prepare. That could be helpful. That could be helpful, absolutely. Moving on to Atlanta. As we come down here to the regular season, kind of a rough first 3 games for our new Kirk Cousins quarterback out there in Atlanta. Kind of rough. I'm not going to lie. That's kind of rough. Pittsburgh, at Philadelphia, Kansas City. Now, thankfully, they get 2 of those games at home. That can be absolutely a benefit. But then they get some wins, potentially. Some wins, some easier matchups for absolute certainty. And the end of the season. I mean, those 4 or 5 weeks at the end of the year could make a late run. Obviously, this one will be circled for Kirk Cousins at Minnesota, the return to Minnesota. Moving on to the Cardinals. Tough to start at Buffalo. That's a tough matchup. That place is going to be rocking. Also, San Francisco, Green Bay, Chargers, Dolphins. That is a rough 4-game stretch back to back. Those are all pretty legit teams. And you don't get a bye till a couple weeks even after that. You get a bye before you go at Seattle, divisional game. Should be helpful to have a bye there. End of the season, this kind of middle section here, there's some potential wins. Obviously, a lot of divisional games that will be very telling for the playoffs at the end of the year. We only got 3 teams left. We're going to keep this rolling Regular season for the Seahawks, open with Denver at home, then go at New England, then Miami at home. That's a bit of a back and forth. Home, away, home. Nice that it is in that, but then they got to go at Detroit. Kind of a lot of travel, but definitely some W's potentially at the beginning of the season. I think New England's probably a W, and getting Denver at home right at the beginning of the year. Is the rookie quarterback ready to rock and roll? Maybe not. I think there could be some potential there for a decently fast start, but then, it's a couple of tough games, but then you get a kind of a breather there with New York before you get San Francisco at home. You get Buffalo at home. Again, cold, warmer weather teams out here on the West Coast moving out to the East Coast. It's nice to get those teams at home, or early in the season. They got both of those things to be true. Then end with the Rams. I don't think this is a bad schedule. I don't think that is telling me to run away from the Seahawks. We've had some schedules that have been pretty scary so far. 49ers, Super Bowl runner-ups, should have a pretty tough schedule theoretically, right? Start with New York at home. I mean, it's going to be a fun game, but I think San Francisco should roll them. Like, there's some W's at the beginning of this season for San Francisco. Absolutely. Obviously, this one will be circled for everybody because we want to see what's going to happen. Then Dallas, then a bye. Would have liked that bye to be more around those. It is tough to have Kansas City coming off of a bye for this game. Remember that. That's going to be a very difficult game for them to win. And then towards the end of the season, it's not the easiest end of the year. I think Detroit game is also going to be very exciting. Again, notice they got them at home. They got Detroit at home, and they got Kansas City at home. That's big. That's big. Probably the two, top-ranked teams in their conference. You get both of them at home. Those are going to be good matchups for them. And last but not least, the Rams, taking a look at the regular season at Detroit. This is going to be fun. This is just going to be fun. That's a good storyline. There's a lot of really, really great Week 1 storylines in the NFL. They really cooked on this one. Absolutely. They get San Francisco at home, at Chicago, then Green Bay at home. As we roll down here to the end of the season, there's some W's here, potentially for the Rams. I think the Rams potentially are a playoff team. No really terrible back-to-backs either. You get San Francisco, but then you get the Bears, and then you get Green Bay, and then you get the Raiders, and then Minnesota. Right? It's not too bad back-to-back. You get Detroit, but then you get Arizona, then you get San Francisco. Obviously, divisional games, always difficult. Let me know in the comments down below who you think the biggest winners and losers. I think, honestly, Kansas City, for being the Super Bowl champion, I liked their schedule. I felt that was pretty good. There were some other schedules that were a lot rougher, but Kansas City, I think, is my biggest winner. Again, we'll be going through all of these teams throughout the summer as we get prepared for regular season in the NFL. It is so good to have football to talk about, things happening. Cannot wait for football season. Let me know in the comments down below your biggest winner, and we'll see you tomorrow.